All right, Shabbos, good morning. Let us begin. So we are continuing in Eretz Hashem today in Os Samich Beis, in Sidkas HaTzadik. So if you remember again, we're going through the various midos and milos of past individuals who really cultivated a particular personality trait or character trait or midah, passed that on to their family, and then in Eretz Hashem, that midah became the purview of all of Klal Yisrael. And through this os, we really begin to understand and appreciate the entire, we'll call it spiritual DNA of Am Yisrael. So we find ourselves today, page Kuf Nun Beis, in the Be'uria Chasidus, the left-hand column. Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom, zocha ba'atzmo lema'alas haTorah. Moshe Rabbeinu himself was zocha to the level or to the maila of Torah. Now, what does this mean? Shari Nikra is al Shmo Torah's Moshe's Avdi. Because now, on a most basic level, Moshe Rabbeinu has the distinct privilege in that Torah is known by his name, right? It's Torah's Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Torah's Moshe Avdi, as the quotes the pasuk from Malachi. So we'll say, what does this mean that Torah is known by Moshe Rabbeinu? V'higam shleimus hasagas hachachma ha'elyona shaTorah novas mimenu. Now, when we say that, when we refer to the Torah as Moshe Rabbeinu's Torah, Torah's Moshe Avdi. And even when we think about Moshe Rabbeinu's crowning accomplishment is that he was able to go to Har Sinai and come back down and give us the Luchos. So when we think about that, says Reb Tzadok, what does that teach us? It teaches us that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to achieve or to reach a sublime level of chachma, of wisdom and understanding. That Moshe Rabbeinu understood the world, and Moshe Rabbeinu understood himself, and Moshe Rabbeinu understood HaKadosh Baruch Hu in an exceptionally unique way, a way which only comes about through Torah. He says, Ve'im kein zacha l'shem Talmid Chacham. So Moshe Rabbeinu was really the first person to ever reach the level of Talmid Chacham. What does it mean to reach the level of Talmid Chacham? V'haisa machshavto shakua legamre b'Torah u'ba'avodas Hashem Yisbarach b'li hefsik shel rega echad. That to be a Talmid Chacham means, according to Reb Tzadok, is that one's machshava, one's thoughts, are profoundly embedded and rooted in Torah, in the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in a connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, without a moment's lapse. It's a constant and perpetual connection to Torah and to Avodas Hashem. That's what it means to be a Talmid Chacham, and this was the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. So Reb Tzadok really is saying two things over here. Number one, he's describing a level of Chachma that Moshe Rabbeinu reached. So really what he's saying is that Moshe Rabbeinu achieved the level of Chachma, or what he's calling Talmid Chacham. And what does it mean to go ahead and reach a level of being a Talmid Chacham? So Reb Tzadok would say a number of things. Number one, you know Torah. Okay, so that's, interestingly enough, the part of knowing Torah is the easiest part of being a Talmid Chacham. Because I will say, most people, if you plug away at something, you could acquire knowledge of it. So it's acquiring the knowledge of Torah. But ultimately, again, he says, it's being shakua. It's being immersed in Avodas Hashem, being totally immersed in Avodas Hashem, being immersed in the service of the Ribono Shel Olam, without a lapse, without stoppage. It's consistent, it's perpetual, and that knowledge also requires an awareness of self. So Talmid Chacham essentially means is, I know myself, which I will say we often don't think about being a Talmid Chacham in this way, about self-knowledge. But Reb Tzadok says a Talmid Chacham knows himself, a Talmid Chacham knows HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a Talmid Chacham knows Torah, and a Talmid Chacham is constantly, I like this word that Reb Tzadok uses, shakua, constantly immersed in the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Avodas Hashem, b'li hefsek, without interruption. Now, of course, I will say, what Reb Tzadok is describing over here is the highest level of Talmid Chacham. obviously we're going to see that there are, in all of these midos, just like we saw before that there, David HaMelech was a chassid. There are different levels of being a chassid. So, Aaron HaKohen, or Levi, I should say, was a tahar. There are different levels of being tahar. So too, there are different levels of being a Talmud Chacham. But the definition I find quite riveting. To be a Talmud Chacham means you have to know yourself. Because mostly the truth is in life, it sounds strange, many of us don't know ourselves. We don't really know ourselves. We like to create an image of who we are for ourselves, but in reality, I'm not the person who I think I am. And sometimes I'm a little bit too nervous and a little bit too frightened to actually get to know the person who I really am. And the problem is when you don't know your inner self and you aren't really in touch with who you are, it's very hard to grow in life. So Talmud Chacham knows who he is. The Talmud Chacham strives to understand who HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. And the Talmud Chacham ultimately strives to understand Torah. And the Talmud Chacham is shakua, constantly immersed and embedded in avodas Hashem, in the service of the Ribono Shel Olam, without stoppage, without a lapse. So Reb Tzaddik goes on, he says, וקנה מאי לזו בעצם, מהוסו ובפנימיוס נפשו. This is who Moshe Rabbeinu was in his essence. So if Levi was a tahar, and ultimately, and Yosef was a tzaddik, and David HaMelech was a chassid, Moshe Rabbeinu was the Talmud Chacham. That was his identity. He was a Talmud Chacham. Now look how beautiful this is. He says, now here's where everything changes. Because remember, up until now, we've always been following a particular model, which is you find the individual who is the paradigmatic representation or embodiment of a particular midah. He created, so to speak, this midah. Then what happens? He passes it along to his mishpacha. And then what happens? Then that midah goes from the individual to the mishpacha and ultimately becomes accessible to all Am Yisrael. Right? That's how this works. Now Reb Tzaddik says there's an exception. What's the exception? The exception ultimately is the midah of Talmud Chacham. Why? Reb said this is incredible. Even though Moshe Rabbeinu was the paradigmatic representation and embodiment of this midah, he was unable to go ahead and pass this on to his children. He goes, Kimosha Zacha Shara Shem Mishpacha, Kimosha Amra Vasinu Zal. Supposed to hear what's happening over here? Aaron, or Levi, I should say, could pass Tara to his children. Yosef could pass Tzidkos to his children. David could pass Chasidus to his children. But yet, ultimately, Moshe Rabbeinu was unable to pass the midah of Talmud Chacham over to his children. Why not? This is incredible. He says, remember again, Moshe Rabbeinu asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu to pass the mantle of his greatness onto his children. V'lo nisanu HaKadosh Baruch Hu davar zeh. And the Ribono Shel Olam did not acquiesce to this request. Why is this? V'zeh mipnei ki tamidei chachamim einon mitzuyin. Liyos b'neim tamidi chachamim kimo she'amru Chazal b'nedarim ki haTorah hi Toras Hashem ve'ein lo shaychus pratis ima shetiyeh shelo lahorisha labanav. They both say this is incredible. You could pass on to your children many things and many midos. The one thing you can't pass on to your children is the ability to be a Talmud Chacham. That's a personal decision that every single individual must make. So this is incredible. I could pass on to my children to be a tahar. I could pass on to my children to be a chassid. I could pass on to my children to be a tzaddik. Those are all midos we've seen. And that's what happened. Each and every individual personified these particular midos, passed it on to his mishpacha. But the one midah that cannot be passed on is, Reb Tzaddik says, the midah of Talmud Chacham. Because the ability to become a Talmud Chacham, to know yourself, to know Torah, to know the Ribono Shel Olam, to be shakua, to be immersed in avodas Hashem, without a lapse, without a stoppage, that you can't. That's not hereditary. You can't go ahead and convey that, even if you role model in all the right ways. That is a decision that ultimately the child must make. That is a decision that every individual must make. What Reb Tzaddik is highlighting is there are certain midos that could become part of the DNA that can be passed down. Obviously, we'll say with every midah, a person has to make an active choice to go ahead and actualize it. But there are certain things which can be handed down, certain things which can be modeled, but cannot be handed down. Talmud Chacham, says Reb Tzadok, is a decision that every single person has to individually make. It so profound. He says, Ki haTorah Toras Hashem, because the Torah, and we'll say, why is that? So why is that I can become a tzaddik like Yosef and pass that down to my children, or a chassid like David and pass that down to my children, or a tahar like Levi and pass that down to my children, but yet I'm not a Talmud Chacham? We'll say, I'll tell you why. Because Reb Tzadok will tell us why. Because at the end of the day, those midos are mine. In other words, I could choose to be a tzaddik like Yosef. That's a choice I make. And if I make that choice, that midah becomes mine. When it comes to becoming a Talmud Chacham, becoming that midah is anchored in a relationship with Torah. Torah is not mine. Torah is not mine. Torah belongs, says Reb Tzadok, to the Ribono Shel Olam. So because it is, so look at his words. He says, Ki haTorah hi Toras Hashem, ve'ein lo sheichus pratis ima shetiyeh shelo laharisha lebanav. You see, you could only go ahead and give over to your children or inherit to your children something which belongs to you, right? If I very much like your watch, I can't go ahead and write in my will, I hereby bequeath to my children Reuven's watch. Okay, that's very beautiful, right? I can't do that. It's not mine. You cannot be morish something that is not yours. So at the end of the day, all of these other midos that we're describing, they become mine. But the midah of Talmud Chacham, that's anchored and rooted in Torah. Torah is something that each and every individual must create a relationship, their own relationship, with the Ribono Shel Olam. Amru Chazal, Sha'afa Pi, here it is, it's a Mishnah in Avos, or actually a Mishnah in Yoma. Sha'afa Pi Shekeser Kahuna, Nitan LaAaron Abanav, even though again the crown of Kahuna was given over to Aaron and his sons, the Keser Malchus, Nitan LeDavid Ulazaro, the crown of monarchy was given over to David and his offspring. Shona Mehem Keser Torah, Shehumunach Lakol. Keser Torah, so we'll say, no matter how badly you want to be a Kohen or a Levi, if you're not a member of the tribe of Levi, not going to happen. No matter how much you want to be king, if you're not a member of the tribe of Yehuda, a member of David HaMelech's family, not going to happen. However, when it comes to Keser Torah, Shehumunach Lakol. Keser Torah is open and accessible to everyone. Whoever wants it, come and take it. See, I will say, this is the interesting thing about Keser Torah, is that at the end of the day, whoever wants it could have it, but you can't acquire it for someone else. So anyone who wants it has the ability to access it and acquire it. But no matter how dedicated you may be to Torah, you cannot be morish it to your children. You could set an example, you could properly behaviorally model for them what the right thing, but at the end of the day, for my children to have Torah, for my child to reach the level of Talmud Chacham, he's going to have to make that decision on his own. So Reb Tzadok introduces us to this idea that Moshe Rabbeinu embodies the midah. You see, we often think of Talmud Chacham as a descriptive term. Reb Tzadok here uses it as a midah. There is a midah or a maila of Talmud Chacham. That is a maila of a person who knows himself, knows Torah, knows HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and is shakua, is constantly immersed in the service of the Ribono Shel Olam. The beautiful part of this midah is that it is acquirable and accessible to all. The challenge of this midah is, unlike the other midos, which can be passed down generationally, the Maila of Talmud Chacham can't be passed down. If you want it, you have to take it and acquire it for yourself. All right, we'll stop over here. We're going to continue. We're not finished with Moshe Rabbeinu. We'll spend one more morning on him in Eretz Hashem tomorrow morning and complete this midah. Beautiful. Thank you, Sid. All right, I will say good morning. Thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan, Naftoli and Chava Tilson from Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all of its shiur and drashos this month. Naftoli for thanking his chaver Benjamin Wohl for introducing him to the Daf Yomi. May Hashem bless us all to finish the Daf Yomi cycle together and celebrate with a siyum in Eretz Yisrael. To thank Baruch Meir and Rena Dubin. May Hashem continue to protect our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael, and may all of our children remain safe and complete their year of learning with a deep connection to the land and to Hashem's Torah. To thank our week of learning sponsor, Mrs. Selma Wolf, for a full shlema for her grandson, Kobe Rofberg, Yaakov Zev Ben Sivya Devora, and to thank our Daf Yomi sponsors, Robert and Lisi Lilienfeld, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Robert's grandfather, William Myers Velvel, and Avram Zichron Livracha, and to thank Saeed and Sima Haken for dedicating the Daf today in the schus of Hatzlacha for their entire mishpacha. Shukach to all of our sponsors, and above with that, let us begin. So we have a beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Nun Ches 58, and we are picking up on Nun Zayin Amud Beis 57b. We left off at the two dots on 57b. So we'll say, remember again, continuing in the avoda of the Beis Hamikdash. So the Mishnah says as follows: Ira dam hapar l'soch dam hasar. So remember again, the Mishnah said that they would go ahead and pour the blood of the par into the dam of the saftey. So we'll say, so remember again, not they, he. So remember again, two blood services. We've gone through this extensively already. The blood service of the par has to be done first, then the blood service of the saftey. It's done inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Pretty much the same avoda is done outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. We saw machlokes, 2 stands, 1 stand. So the Rambam Paskins, 2 stands. But then when the blood service is complete, both for the damapar damasar, so the Mishnah says, Ira damapar l'sok damasar. The remaining blood of the par is poured into the dam hasoyer. So Tana Kimando Amr Ma'arvin Lekrono. So we'll say, so remember again, the Mishnah says over here. Now we are going to see in the next Mishnah, that there is one more blood service. And that one additional blood service is a blood application on the corners of the Mizbeach HaKitoras. So remember again, there is a golden altar that is inside of the Beis Hamikdash, which is the incense altar. So we are going to see that halacha l'maisa, there's one more blood application. So the Gemara just says, or you see based on the Mishnah, that halacha l'maisa ma'arvin lekronos, that we combine the blood of the par and the blood of the saftey before doing the blood applications on the corners of the Mizbeach. The Itmar, because we're going to say this is a machlokes, Rabbi Yona's son, Chad Amr Ma'arvin, the Chad Amr in Ma'arvin. One opinion says that halacha l'maisa, before we do the blood application on the golden Mizbeach, we combine the blood. And one opinion said we don't combine the blood, to which the Gemara says, so say, there's a machlokes about how to do the blood avoda on the Mizbeach Hazav. One opinion says that just like the blood applications of the par and the saftey were done separately in the Kodesh HaKadoshim and on the Kapores, so too they're done separately on the corners of the golden Mizbeach. And the second opinion says no, halacha l'maisa, the blood is combined and then applied on the golden Mizbeach. So the Gemara says, Tistayim, Rabbi Yoshua d'Amar Ma'arvin. It would appear that Rabbi Yoshua is the opinion who says that we combine the blood. Why? So the Gemara says, "Da'amar afal gav delo ksiv yachtov kiman dichsiv yachtov dami." Because Rabbi Yoshua says, even though it doesn't say yachtov, it's as if it said yachtov. Now, what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. Da'amar afal gav delo ksiv yachtov. Totally separate discussion. The Sanya ish asheri kalelas aviv esimom. So we'll say the pasuk says, if a man will go ahead and curse his father and his mother. So interestingly enough, this is the prohibition to curse one's parents. So interestingly enough, the Gemara says, Einli ella aviv imo. I'm reading in Rashi now. I only know if you curse your mother and father together that there's liability. Aviv below imo, imo below aviv minayin. How do I know that if I curse my father without my mother, or my mother without my father, that there's liability as well? Talmud lomar, aviv kilo, imo kilo, the Rabbi Yoshua. So Rabbi Yoshua says, because the pasuk goes back and enumerates a cursing of the father and the mother independently and separately. So the idea, so Rabbi Yoshua says, were it not for the fact that the Torah went back and reckoned them both separately, I might have thought that liability for cursing one's parents is only when one curses them together. Rabbi Yonasan Omer, Mashmushnein ke'echad, Umashma kol echad ve'echad be'atzmo. Rabbi Yonasan says, no, I understand liability for cursing one's parents together and also separately. So the Gemara says, Ad sheyifrot lecha kosev yachtov. In other words, you always assume that there's individual liability unless, of course, the Torah explicitly groups things together. Amma l'Rabbi Yoshia ilo hadar ksiv aviv v'imo kilel hava amina reishi dikra shneim ke'echad mashma. So we'll see from here that according to Rabbi Yoshia, were it not for the fact that the pasuk went ahead and enumerated aviv and imo separately, you would have automatically grouped them together. Hachanami midama par midama soyer shneim ke'echad mashma. So to Rabbi Yoshia holds over here that when it says midama par midama soyer, the default understanding of that is that what? The bloods have been combined. So when it says that you sprinkle on it from dama par dama soyer, the assumption is the blood has been combined. So Rabbi Yoshia is the opinion who holds that before you do the blood application on the Mizbeach Hazav, the incense altar, you go ahead and combine the bloods together and then go ahead and apply. To which the Gemara says, decided Rabbi Yoshia, fine. The Gemara says, good. I feel Tamer Rabbi Yonasan. Gemara says, maybe not. It could even reflect the view of Rabbi Yonasan. How so? Shiny hacha, it's different over here. Dichsiv achos. See, Rabbi said the pasuk does go out of its way to say the word achos, meaning that what? That the blood application is done as one. So Tanya Dlo Kishinuyan, so we'll say the Gemara quotes a brisa the other way. So we'll say the Gemara is just talking about over here that it's not. We were trying to figure out. We know we have a machlokes, right? What's the machlokes? So the machlokes is halacha l'maisa is the dama par dama soyer combined into one bowl and then the mixture applied, or is the dama par dama soyer applied to the mizbeach independently? That's the machlokes. So Gemara is just trying to figure out who's saying what. So time dil kishin and braysa. That's not like what we just said before. V'lokach mi dama par mi dama soyer. The pasuk says the coin will take from the dama par and the dama soyer. Sheyihiyu mi'uravin div Rabbi Yoshia. So also Rabbi Yoshia says that they should be mixed together. That you mix the dama par, you mix the dama soyer, and then you go ahead and apply it to the golden mizbeach. Top of nunches. Rabbi Yonasan Omer mizeh b'fnei etz atzmo. Rabbi Yonasan says, no, you apply the two bloods independently. First, you apply the dam apar, and then you apply the dam hasoyer. Amar lo Rabbi Yoshia. So Rabbi Yoshia says to Rabbi Yonasan, Balo kvar ne'emar achos. So Rabbi Yoshia says, but 1 second, Rabbi Yonasan, it says achos, one blood application, right? It says one blood application. Amar lo Rabbi Yonasan, Balo kvar ne'emar mi dam apar mi dam hasoyer. Rabbi Yonasan says, I know it says achos, but it also says midam hapar umidam hasoyer, which indicates to us that there is an application of both types of blood. Imkain lama ne'emar achas. If that's the case, that you applied the bloods separately, so why does it say achos? Lomar lecha achos v'lo shtayim. Ultimately, again, to go ahead and teach me what? There's one blood application. I'm sorry. Lomar lecha achas v'lo shtayim midam hapar. To teach you, I will say, that even though you're going to apply the bloods separately, there's one blood application of each. You apply the dam hapar once and not twice. You apply the dam hasoyer once and not twice. Now we're going to see. I apply it. Excuse me. I actually apply it 4 times. We're going to see that the blood is applied on all 4 corners. What it means is one application in that one time per corner, as opposed to multiple times per corner. Tanya idach, another braysa, v'lakach midam hapar midam hasoyer. So what's another braysa? Braysa says you shall take from the dam of the par and the dam hasoyer. Shimu uravin zebozeh. That the blood should be mixed together. O eina ella mazeh bifnei atzmo or mizeh bifnei atzmo. Or you might have thought that no, you should apply the par blood and the sair blood independently. Talmud Lomar achos. Therefore, the pasuk says you apply it once. Ustama Rabbi Yoshia, and Rabbi say it reflects the view of Rabbi Yoshia. So Rabbi say what emerges from this Gemara is that when it comes to the blood applications, and again we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves because the blood applications on the Mizbeach Hazav, on the golden altar, on the golden Mizbeach, which is normally used for Ketores, that's mamish the next Mishnah. We're going to see that on the top of Amud Beis right now. So the Gemara is jumping to that discussion. And the Shailu just is for that application, is the Dam HaPar and the Dam HaSa'ir applied individually, or are they combined together and applied jointly? That is a machlokes, Rabbi Yonasan, or Rabbi Yoshia, and Rabbi Yonas. Rabbi Yoshia saying they're mixed and then applied. Rabbi Yonasan saying they are applied separately. I will say, how do we paskin? The Rambam paskins like Rabbi Yoshia, namely that, like the Mishnah says. So essentially, what you have is namely that the bloods are combined and then applied on the Mizbeach HaZahav mixed together. So essentially, I will say what you have for the blood service is as follows. You have the Dam HaPar, the Dam HaSoyer. Inside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you apply the Dam HaPar, Achas Lamala, Sheva Lamata. You apply the Dam HaSoyer, Achas Lamala, Sheva Lamata. Outside of the Beis HaMikdash, you apply the blood, right? You sprinkle the blood in the direction of the parochas, of the curtain. Achas Dam HaPar, Achas Lamala, Sheva Lamata. Dam HaSoyer, Achas Lamala, Sheva Lamata. You now have the two bowls with the remaining blood. What happens now, the way the Rambam paskins, halacha l'maisa, you take the leftover Dam of the par, pour it into the leftover Dam HaSoyer. You now have one bowl of the combined Dam HaPar, Dam HaSoyer. You now use that combined bowl for the blood application on the Mizbeach HaZav. For the sprinkling of the blood, or really it's not really sprinkling, we say it's the application of the blood on Mizbeach HaZav, on the golden altar. That's how he paskin like Rabbi Yoshia. Nasan as hamali bereikon was an interesting discussion over here. So remember, the Mishnah then said, after you go ahead and combine the blood together, you place the full utensil inside of the empty utensil. Right? So you place the mali. So essentially you go ahead, remember you're pouring the Dam HaPar into the Dam HaSoyer. So then in Pashtas, you're going to put the empty kli that had the Dam HaPar underneath the kli which houses the Dam HaSoyer. Now this is very interesting. Hiniach mizrak besoch mizrak v'kibel boas adam mahu. So listen to this. So the Gemara now asks a general question. Forget about Yom Kippur. What happens stam, a regular day in the Beis HaMikdash? You're a Kohen, you're shechting a carbon. Even though, again, shechita doesn't have to be done with a Kohen, but you're a Kohen shechting a carbon. And remember, again, after shechita, what do you have to do? Kabbalah. So remember, again, you have a bowl for Kabbalah. So we'll say, what about the following situation? You took two bowls. You don't need two bowls, but you took two bowls. So you have the bowl in which you're being makabel the dam, and that bowl is sitting in another bowl. So now you're holding you're a Kohen, holding two bowls, going ahead and receiving the dam. So the Gemara says, what is the status? Mahu. Is that a kosher Kabbalah? Now, what's the shaila? Min b'mino chotzeitz or ino chotzeitz? So let's see here the shaila. You're not allowed to have a chatzitza. There can't be anything interposing between your body and the klisharis. For example, let's say the Kohen Gadol decides to wear gloves. Right? He wears gloves. What's the status of his avoda? Puzzle. There can't be anything interrupting between. So we'll say, so therefore again, what's the shaila? Does the presence of the additional kli, remember you have two bowls over here, only we'll call it the upper one is being used for Kabbalah. The bottom one that's touching your hand, not really doing anything. So is that called a chatzitza? Is that called an interposition between your hand and the kli sharetz, thereby invalidating the avoda? Then I will say, what's the shaila? They're both bowls. So the shaila is, min b'mino, the two like items, create a chatzitza situation or not? This is the fundamental shaila. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, "V'kibelas adam tap Rashi kol kabbalah shaklayim asashen kamei ba'ilei." Rashi says this is not a Yom Kippur shaila. This is a general karbanos shaila. Min b'mino, Rashi says mizrak b'mizrak, two bowls. So does the presence of the additional bowl, is that a chatzitza or not? Now both say, why is it a shaila? Of course it's a chatzitza. It's an extra bowl because it's all bowls. So do we say min b'mino? They're all bowls. That's not called the chatzitza. Chatzitza is something that's foreign or alien, right? At the end of the day, this is all bowls, and therefore it should not. Is it a chatzitza or not? A fascinating shaila. Amar le tinisua. So he said to him, the truth is, we know the answer to this. What's the answer? Nasan as hamali bereikan. We already learned this. What did our Mishnah say here in Yoma? What did the Mishnah say? After you finish with the blood applications, mibachutz, what do? You pour the leftover dam hapar into the dam hasoyer. And then what do you do with the bowl of the dam hapar? What do you do with it? You put it underneath the bowl of the dam hasoyer, which means that the Kohen, when he comes to do the blood avoda on the Mizbeach HaKitor, the Mizbeach HaZav, is what? Holding bepashtos two bowls in his hand. He's holding two bowls in his hand, and yet clearly it's not a chatzitza. So the Gemara says, "My love, hoshiv mizrak male l'soch mizrak reikon." Are we not talking about a case where, again, when it says you pour the bowl of the damapar into the bowl of the damasayer, and now bepashtos, you put the empty bowl underneath the full bowl, and the kohen holds both. So from here you see that ultimately, again, min b'mino is not chotzetz, to which the Gemara says, lo, ira mizrak male l'sok mizrak reikanhu. Now the Gemara says, interestingly enough, what are you doing? You're going ahead and pouring a full bowl into an empty bowl. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Lo ira mizrak male la'achar she'ira damapar l'sok damasayer chozer uma'ara mizrak male l'sok mizrak reikon. No, say, listen to what it means. It means like this. This is fascinating. You pour the leftover damapar into the damasayer, and then what? Then you take that mixture and pour it into another empty bowl. Empty bowl. So the Gemara says, "Hat hana l'reisha ira damapar l'sok damasayer kedei la'arvan yafe yafe." Rabbi say, why are you doing this? In order to have the bloods mixed together properly. Because Rabbi says, we've already seen, right? Remember again, ox blood and goat blood are different. Remember again, how are they different? Number one, right? So again, the coloring is different, and number two is what's the word? Viscosity. Thank you. Viscosity of it is different as well. So also, so the idea is you want them to be mixed together for the blood. You want them mixed together properly for the blood application to the golden mizbeach. So what happens? Actually, the process is as follows: you take the kli with the damapar, pour it into the kli with the damasayer, and take that mixture and pour it into a third kli. What then happens? What are you holding then when you come to do the final avoda? What are you holding? Only one kli. Right? See, right, the happiness, you might have thought you're holding three. No. You're only holding that final third kli. So kli number one that had the damapar is gone. Kli number two that held the damasar is gone. And all you have is kli number three, which has now the combined bloods that have been properly mixed as a result of moving them all. It's like Sheva brachas, right? Sheva brachas. I say, you're right, you're pouring to here, you're pouring to there, you're pouring to the third one, and everybody's good. So the Gemara says, so therefore both say, there's no raya. So the Gemara, remember again, at the shaila of the Gemara still applies, which is on a general day, if you were to do Kabbalah with two bowls in your hands, would that work or not? That is a general shaila, but there is no raya from Yom Kippur. So Tashma, so we'll say the Gemara tries to prove from different ways. This is interesting. Haya omid al gabe kli or al gabe regal chavero. We'll say if when doing the avoda, the Kohen was standing on top of a kli or is standing on his friend's foot, pasul. Ultimately, again, the avodah is pasul. Now, I will say, I understand the first part, right? Why standing on a kli? Because remember, nothing could be chotzetz between the Kohen's foot and the ritzpah and the floor of the Beis Mikdash, which is why the Kohen can't wear shoes. So, if you're standing on a kli, I understand at the end of the day why that is a chatzitza. The avodah is invalid. But what's interesting, if you're standing on someone's foot, see, I will say, a foot should be what? Is what? It's min bamino, right? It's two like items. So it's like one big foot, right? Standing on someone's foot is like one big foot. Why should that be a chatzitza? So from here you see min bamino chotzetz, to which the Gemara says no. The Gemara says shiny regel de lo motzi mevatale. See, I will say here's the issue. The reason why that foot, your friend's foot, is a chatzitza, is because you can't ensure that it'll remain there the entire time. And I will say that even if you want to hold that min baminos in a chotzetz, that's because you control the other item. But when you're standing on something that you do not control, like someone else's foot, so halacha l'maisa, that is a chatzitza, because at any moment the person could pull it in or take it out. So the Gemara says, Tashma. So still, I haven't resolved the shaila. Tashma, Tani Rabbi Shmuel, es kol kli ashares asher yishar subam bakodesh, shnei kelim v'sherus achos. Rabbi say the pasuk says, as kokli ashares, the service utensils, asher yishar subam bakodesh, that you will go ahead and serve with them, plural, in the kodesh. Shabbos say the Gemara picks up an interesting observation. So the Torah, when speaking about the service utensils, uses a plural lashon and says when you do the avoda with the utensils. Now the truth is, when we would normally read that pasuk, see, of course it uses the plural. Why does it use the plural? Because in the course of avodah, you're generally what? Using more than one utensil. The Gemara is making a fascinating observation. Maybe it's coming to teach us that halacha l'maisa, even if you used 2 utensils in one service, halacha l'maisa, it's not a chatzitz. And I both say that is indeed how the Rambam paskins, that if you were to do Kabbalah in 2 bowls, one inside of the other, then halacha l'maisa, it is not a chatzitza. The avodah is kosher. Why? Because min b'mino eno chotzet. So I'll say a very important halacha. I'll just give you an interesting application of this min b'mino eno chotzet, nothing to do with humor or kavanos. So we'll say, the halacha is that the bias of your tefillin is supposed to touch your bicep, right? Of the shalyad, the shalrosh, right? So the bicep is supposed to be on the tefillin is supposed to be on the bicep. What happens if this is, I think, much more prevalent if you put on, more like a nusach Ashkenaz, if you wind in as opposed to winding out like nusach Sfarad. Let's say you go ahead and you're putting on your tefillin, and your ritzua comes underneath your bias. That you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to be very careful that your ritzua should not come underneath the bias of your tefillin. That the bias should rest right on your arm. But let's say the ritzua came underneath it, right? And you realized after davening, my ritzua was underneath the bias the entire time. Do I have to put on tefillin again? And the Mishnah Berurah paskins, no. Why not? Min b'mino eno chotzes. Because again, it's all called tefillin. So therefore, again, like items do not serve as an interposition as a chatzitza. So obviously it should be avoided. The tefillin should rest directly on the bicep. But should you realize afterwards that the ritzua was there in between the tefillah and the bicep, it does not undermine the mitzvah of tefillin. Incredible. Same thing by karbanos as well. Good. Let's go back there. Says interesting case. Hiniach siv b'soch hamizrak. So we'll say, let's say in this case, you put the sieve. Sieve is palm bast. It's the absorbent part of a palm tree. Just imagine like a spongy type of item that comes from the palm tree. So niach siv b'soch hamizrak. So let's listen to this case. You placed siv. Rashi says over here, siv hagodel saviv hadekel v'nichrach alav saviv kimin lulavin bigifanim v'urach v'sofeg es hadam v'adam yotzi michol aveira ve'ino chotzeitz kol kach. So here's the shaila. You went ahead and you put this sieve, this palm bast, inside of the kli. And you did Kabbalah now with that palm bast inside of the kli. So what's the shaila? Does the sieve serve as a chatzitza between the dam and the kli? Remember again, the dam must be in a kli sharis. So if now you have this sieve inside of the kli, does that serve as a chatzitza? To which the Gemara says, so hiniach siv b'soch hamizrak v'kiba bo'as adam mahu. What is the halacha? Min b'she'eno min chotzeitz o eno chotzeitz. Do we say, look, in this case, the sieve is eno mino. So do we say min b'she'eno mino is chotzeitz or not? Kevan demachalchal lochai. So on one hand, we could say that the sieve itself is porous. Because it's porous, therefore, the blood kind of goes in and out. So the blood is in contact with the kli sharis, and therefore perhaps it should not be a chatzitza. Or perhaps we say no. Once anything alien is inside of that kli, by definition, that kli sharis, that bowl, by definition, that is a chatzitza. So we'll say, good shaila. Amr Tanina, we learned this. Zolef v'holich ad shemagia l'sfod. So we'll say, the Gemara calls it totally unrelated discussion by para aduma. The Mishnah records over here that if you're gathering mayim chayim, right? If you're gathering spring water for the para aduma service, so again, we're not going to go into all of this now, but the Rashi quotes the Mishnah in Maseches Para that they would use like a hollowed out stone that they would place by the spring in order to gather the water. Let's say you placed a sponge in that kli. You placed a sponge in that stone. So what's the halacha? You can't take the water from the sponge, ultimately, again, for use for the paraduma, but you can go ahead and take out the water up until you get to the sponge. So what do you see from here? So the Gemara says, shiny maya, water is different, the kalish, because the klishi. Water is what's the right word? Klishi literally means light, but I guess what is it? Consistency? A thin consistency, good. Has a thin consistency, right? Ultimately, so water is able to travel easily in and out of the sponge, and therefore, again, halacha l'maisa is considered to be inside of the kli. Ika da'amri, so we'll say, but let's say blood, which is a little bit thicker, perhaps would be a problem. Ika da'amri, others explain, Ika da'amri hachi pashat, this is how it was answered. B'dam kosher, b'kometz pasal. With blood, it would be kosher, but with a kometz, with a mincha, it would be pasal. So we'll say that is indeed how the Rambam paskins. So therefore, halacha l'maisa. We'll say to be clear, l'chatchila, one should not put the sieve, the palm bast, inside of the kli sharis. That's for sure. But if one did it, so halacha l'maisa, interestingly enough, the Gemara posits that it would not pose a problem with the dam. It would not pose a problem. It would not invalidate the dam from being used. Why? Because we assume that because the dam is viscous, right? And the dam is able to go ahead and travel in and out of the bast. So the bast itself, the sieve, is not a chatzitza. Where would it come up as a chatzitza? So also remember, by karba mincha, what do you do by karba mincha? You go out and you do your 3 fingerfuls, you take your kamitza, you put that kamitza inside of a kli sharis. You put that kamitza inside of a kli sharis. If you were to put that kamitza inside of a kli, and that kli were to have a sieve, that would go ahead and be a chatzitza, which makes sense. Why? Because Rabbi Sayyid says, if you do Kabbalah with 2, I think it's working. If you do Kabbalah, If you do Kabbalah with 2 bowls, halacha l'maisa, it works, the avoda works. But if halacha l'maisa, again, you put sieve, palm bast, inside of the bowl, for dam it will work, for mayim it will work, but ultimately for karban mincha it will not. Excellent. We'll say Amud Bey's Mishnah. Here we go. So we'll say, so remember again, now the Gemara records as follows. Remember again, we made reference to this. Now he's combined the blood, just so you know where we're up to. He's combined the dam apar together with the dam hasoyer. Now we're going to do the blood applications on the Mizbeach HaKetores, on the golden altar. So the Gemara says, V'yotze ala Mizbeach shalifnei Hashem. The kohen will go out to the Mizbeach. He will go out to the Mizbeach, ultimately that is before Hashem. So the Gemara says, Zeh Mizbeach Hazov. This refers to the golden Mizbeach. Hischil machta v'yoret. So we'll say, interesting enough, we're going to see that when the Kohen Gadol would go ahead and do the blood applications on the Mizbeach Hazav, on the golden altar, what he would do is he would go over to the corner, dip his finger in blood, and hischil machta v'yoret. He would apply the blood in a downward motion. Again, we'll get into this more in just a little bit. So we'll say, what corner of the Mizbeach? I want to point out, remember, the Mizbeach Hazav was small. So we're going to see, like, you could stand in front of that Mizbeach and touch all 4 corners, right? So just so you understand, as opposed to the Mizbeach Achitza on the outer Mizbeach, for animals, which was very large, this is a very small altar. So mehechanu maschil, from which corner of the golden Mizbeach does the Kohen Gadol begin the blood applications? Mikaren Mizrachis Tzefonis, northeast. Start from the northeast corner, Ma'aravis, then Mizrachis Tzefonis, then Tzefonis Ma'aravis, northwest corner, Ma'aravis Deromis, southwest corner, Deromis Mizrachis, southeast corner. That's the order according to the Mishnah. Makum Shumaschel B'chatas al Mizbeach HaChitzon, Misham Hayagomer al Mizbeach HaPanimi. Shabbos say we're going to see that this is almost like the exact opposite of the way blood was applied on the outer altar. Literally, the way the Mishnah phrases it is the place where he would start with the blood applications of a chatos on the outer Mizbeach. That was the very place where he would finish with the blood applications on the inner Mizbeach. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, no, bimkomo haya omed. Shabbos say the Tanakama holds that the Kohen Gadol would literally walk around the Mizbeach Hazav. He would walk around and do the blood applications on each of the corners. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, he doesn't walk around. Rather, bimkomo haya omed. He would stand in place, umachte, and he would go ahead and apply the blood like that. So in other words, Rabbi Eliezer says, you don't have to walk around. You could stand in place and do the blood applications from where you're standing. Va'al kulon hayu nasun milamata lemala. Now, I will say in general, so Rabbi Eliezer, Mishnah says that when applying the blood, you would apply the blood milamata lemala. You would start, we're going to see this is applied on the chronos, what we call the horns. You would start again on the bottom, right, and work your way up. So, right, you would start from the bottom, work your way up with one exception. Chutz mizu shahai salafanav. with the exception of the corner that the Kohen Gadol was standing directly in front of. Shayanosein milamala lamata. For that corner that he was standing right in front of, the blood application there would be from top to bottom. We're going to see Rashi explains this was in order to go ahead and not dirty his clothing. Again, we'll discuss this. Hiza ataro shel mizbeach sheva pamim. Then Shabbos says, so remember, there's a one blood application on each of the corners, right? The blood application is done milamata lamala in an upward motion, right? From the bottom of the horn top, except for the corner right in front of him, he would go ahead and go from the top to the bottom, and then he would sprinkle at tiharo shel mizbeach. So we're going to see tiharo shel mizbeach means the top of the mizbeach itself. Why the top of the mizbeach is called tiharo shel mizbeach? We'll see in Eretz Hashem. So he would sprinkle on that 7 times. Fine. Ushiyari hadam. Then we'll say now. Remember now the leftover blood. So just so you appreciate now. Remember we'll say what number sprinkling is this? What number sprinkling? Right? 3. Now remember again. Now the truth is this is not really a sprinkling, right? This is an application, right? Remember again. Up until now we've had zrikas hadam. We did a zrika in the kodesh hakadoshim. We did the zrika in the kodesh opposite the paroches, the curtain. Now this is what is called really a nesina. This is a blood application. So now the dam of the par and the dam of the sar have been used 3 times. For the first 2 applications, the first 2 sprinklings, dama par, dama sar were used independently. Remember again, after you finish with your sprinkling on the paroches, on the curtain, what do you do? What did the last Mishnah say? What do? Combine the bloods. So remember again, you're using the combined, we pass like Rabbi Yoshia, you're using the combined blood for the blood application on the golden mizbeach. So then we'll say after you finish applying it on the corners, you sprinkle. So remember this application on the corners. Also, what's the difference between application and sprinkling? Kishmokin, right? Sprinkling is kimatzlif, right? Like a whip, right? And again, nesina literally means you're right. The Kohen Gadol is dipping his finger in the blood and literally going ahead and placing it on each of the corners. After he finishes the corners, he then sprinkles it again on the top of the mizbeach 7 times. Now, what do you do with the leftover blood? V'shiyare hadam hayishofech al yisod. We'll say any leftover blood, he would now take ultimately to the western base of the mizbeach and pour it out on the yisod. The yisod besides the base, we're going to see that there was actually there was a cavity there. There was an opening that was used to pour out remnants, sacrificial remnants or blood. Right? So he would pour it out by the western base. Hayashofech. Now we'll say any leftover blood used from the animal sacrifices, right, on the outer mizbeach, that was poured out by the yisod, by the base on the south side. Elu v'elu. So one was on the west side, one was on the south side. Elu v'elu mis'arvin ba'aman. I will say now, whether you pour it out in the yisod of the west side or the south side, all of that blood goes to the same place. Elu v'elu mis'arvin ba'ama. They all go ahead, all of this blood combines. Amma is a canal, right? Rabbi says this refers to the canal that would go ahead and run out, right? Remember, it was a canal that ran through the Beis HaMikdash. This is how they would clean out in general all of the blood in the Azara. So it was a canal, and then where did that canal go to? V'yotzin lenachal Kidron. This is incredible. The canal itself emptied into the Kidron Valley. And what would happen? V'nimkarin leganonin lezevel. The blood was then sold to farmers for fertilizer. Umolin bahan. But that blood is subject to mi'ilah. So I will say, you cannot just go into the Kidron Valley, stay by the opening of the channel, and collect the blood and use it. Why? Because it was sacrificial. It was still consecrated. In order to go ahead and use it, what do you have to do? In general, what do you have to do in order to go ahead and use Kodesh? You have to redeem it. How do you redeem it? You pay for it. Right? So they would pay the Beis HaMikdash, they would pay the Gizbar for this blood, and once they paid it, the sanctity was transferred onto the money. The blood becomes chol, and can be used ultimately again for fertilizer. That's what it means when it says umolin b'hay. Molin b'hay means if you use it without paying for it, halacha l'maisa, that is mi'ilah. That is mi'ilah. Good. So it says the Gemara Tan Rabbanan the Yatze ala Mizbeach. So remember, I just want to point out the geography here is incredibly important. So remember what's happening. The last time we saw the Kohen Gadol, where was he? Just to reorient ourselves, where was he? Right? Where he was outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, facing the curtain, right? So remember again, when you're facing the curtain, you're facing west. You're facing west. So he was facing west. Behind him, now remember, if he's facing towards the curtain, remember, because he just did his 8 applications, he placed down, he combined the 2 bloods by the 2 stands. Those 2 stands are to the right of him. Right behind him is the Mizbeach Hazav, is the golden altar. What the Gemara now says is something very interesting. He will go out to the Mizbeach. Now both say, this lashon is interesting. Why is it interesting? Because the Yatsa al Mizbeach sounds like what? He's leaving somewhere and going to the Mizbeach. Now, actually, he's not leaving anywhere. Remember, the Mizbeach Hazav is inside of the Kodesh, is inside of the same building, the same structure that the Kohen Gadol finds himself. So what does it mean, Yatsa al Mizbeach? This is incredible. Lefi shematzino beparaba kala mitzvos shekoin omid chutz lemizbeach umaze al haparoches b'shashu maze yochol af ze Talmud lomar v'yatzal mizbeach heichan haya lifnim inamizbeach. Supposed to listen to this. So the Gemara says as follows. You see, there is another time when the Kohen Gadol sprinkles blood towards the paroches. And when is that? We saw this in yesterday's daf. This is the par haba al kol hamitzvos. Now, when do you bring a par haba al kol hamitzvos? If the Kohen Gadol made an erroneous psak halacha, he paskined the wrong way in a particular issue, and he himself performed something that was punishable by kares. So again, he made a mistake. He has to bring a particular carbon. The Rabbi say, now what happens? The blood application of that carbon is similar to Yom Kippur in that he goes out and sprinkles towards the paroches. And here's what's interesting. Where does he stand when he goes ahead and sprinkles that blood? He stands ultimately again between the Mizbeach and the paroches. So the Gemara says, Yakal af zeh. You might have thought the same thing happens over here by Yom Kippur. Therefore, Talmud lomar v'yatzal mizbeach haychan haya. Where was he? Lifnim min hamizbeach. So, Rabbi said, listen to this. What the Gemara says, the Torah is coming to teach us is as follows: that where does the Kohen Gadol do the blood applications on the mizbeach? V'yatza el mizbeach. He goes essentially. Rabbi say what he does is he walks past the mizbeach and then turns around. He walks past it. So, in other words, you might have thought that essentially what kind of happens is the Kohen Gadol finishes doing the blood applications on the parochas, and then what? What does he have to do? Just turn around. No. V'yotze ala mizbeach. He walks past the mizbeach, then turns around and does the avoda. Therefore, again, heichan haya lifnim min hamizbeach. Ultimately, again, he was past the mizbeach. So the Gemara says, Tanya idach. Lifnei Hashem ma Talmud lomar. What does it mean when it says Lifnei Hashem? Am Rabbi Nechemia lefi shemantinu bepar b'sar shem kippurim shekoin omed lifnei min hamizbeach mazal kapores b'shashu mazeh. Shabbos say since by Yom Kippur when the Kohen Gadol was doing the sprinkling on the curtain for the blood of the par and the blood of the sarah, where is he standing? He's standing on the inside of the mizbeach. He's standing between the mizbeach and the parochas. Yochel af zeh kain. You might have thought, therefore, when he does the blood applications on the Mizbeach, same thing. He should stand between the Mizbeach and the Parochas. Talmud lomar, Mizbeach kitores hasamim, or Mizbeach kitores hasamim lifnei Hashem, asher ba'ol hamoed, Mizbeach lifnei Hashem, ve'ein kohen lifnei Hashem. So also he teaches us that when the Kohen does the avoda, when he does the blood applications on the golden Mizbeach, he does it on the Mizbeach that is lifnei Hashem. The Mizbeach is lifnei Hashem, but the Kohen is not lifnei Hashem. What does that mean? To which the Gemara says, HaKetzad, Omeid chutz lemizbeach umazeh. What it means is he stands outside of the Mizbeach and he does the sprinkling. Which means what I will say. So again, for tomorrow, Eretz Hashem, we actually got a big cardboard of the Beis Hamikdash. I'll have that out by tomorrow. But again, I will say, just to illustrate it, it's very simple. You understand it. Up until now, the Kohen Gadol has been standing right over here, right opposite the curtain, going ahead and doing the hazah right over here by this broken line. You might have thought that when it comes ultimately to the blood applications on the Mizbeach, all he's going to do is what? Turn around and do the blood applications right here on the Mizbeach. Kamash Mala, no, that he's going to go ahead and now walk past the Mizbeach. We're going to see there's a machlokes as to how he walks past the Mizbeach, but he's going to walk past the Mizbeach and ultimately now stand in front of the Mizbeach. So both say the Torah phrases this as that he does the avodah on the Mizbeach that is Lifnei Hashem. And the way this is incredible, the way the Gemara darshans it is, the Mizbeach is Lifnei Hashem, but the Kohen Gadol is not Lifnei Hashem. Now what does that mean, Abosai? The Mizbeach is Lifnei Hashem, and that the Mizbeach is right in front of the curtain. But where is the Kohen Gadol? Where is the Kohen Gadol? Behind the Mizbeach. So I'll say at this point in time now for the blood application, the Kohen Gadol is standing behind the Mizbeach, still facing west, right? He's still facing the curtain. But now there's the Kohen Gadol, the Mizbeach Hazav, the golden Mizbeach right in front of him, and then the Parochas, then the curtain. Good. So we'll say that's halacha number 1. Weiter. Hischil machta v'yored. So I'll say, so remember again, he would go ahead and do the blood application. Machta v'yored literally means, literally what it sounds like is, he would go ahead and dab the blood on the corner and then move downwards. So Tana Rabbanon, hischil machta v'yored he mehechan hayamascha. So we'll say, before we get into how the actual application was done, the Gemara is a bit more focused on which corner is he starting with. So remember again, we saw machlokes in the Mishnah. So mehechan hayamaschil, mikeren mizrachis duromis. So we'll say, where would he start from? He would start ultimately again from the southeast corner. So southeast, duromis ma'aravis, southwest, ma'aravis tziphonis, northwest, tziphonis mizrachis, northeast, divrei Rabbi Akiva. So I'll say these are the words of Rabbi Akiva. If you happen, again, we'll get into this more tomorrow, but if you happen to have the pictures, you could see ultimately, again, this is picture number 140, the position of Rabbi Akiva. So you could see it both say how, again, we'll see this more tomorrow, but you'll see ultimately, again, so just by the way, to give you a simple orientation. Remember, we've established now that the Kohen Gadol is standing behind the Mizbeach HaKetoris, behind the golden altar, facing the curtain. According to Rabbi Akiva, essentially what's happening over here is he starts from the bottom left corner and makes his way around. So counterclockwise. Rabbi Akiva goes counterclockwise. So you start again from, and remember, both say B'Pashtus, also remember, how is he getting to these corners? Right now we're assuming, what is he doing? He's walking. Again, we'll change that. But according to Rabbi Akiva, start from the bottom left corner and work your way around counterclockwise. That's Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yosef Lili Omer, no. Mikar Mizrachis Tzfonis. You start ultimately again from the northeast corner. Tzfonis Ma'aravis, northwest. Ma'aravis, Dromis, southwest. Dromis Mizrachis, southeast. So the Gemara says, that's Rabbi Yosef Lili. Malkum Rabbi Yosef Lili Maschil, Sham Rabbi Akiva Posek. Malkum Rabbi Akiva Maschil, Sham Rabbi Yosef Lili Posek. And I will say again, Rabbi Yosef Lili and Rabbi Akiva are exactly the opposite. If you look, if you have the pictures, picture number 141, I will say, you don't even need the picture. It's easy enough to illustrate. Rabbi Yosef Lili has him starting the exact opposite end, whereas Rabbi Akiva has you starting from the bottom left corner and going around counterclockwise. Rabbi Yosef Lili has you starting from the bottom right corner, ultimately again going around. No, it's just the opposite, by the way. Just the opposite. I'm sorry. Rabbi Akiva is clockwise. I'm sorry. Right, Rabbi? Same thing. Bottom left corner. Rabbi Akiva is bottom left corner, and Rabbi Akiva has you going around clockwise. Rabbi Yosef Lili has you starting from the bottom right corner and going around counterclockwise. So I don't say we'll stop over for today, but this is the fundamental machlokes. Now, again, I want to be clear. Right now, according to both Rabbi Yosef Lili and Rabbi Akiva, halacha lamaisa, you're walking around. One more time. Rabbi Akiva, start at the bottom left corner, go around the Mizbeach clockwise. Rabbi Yosef Lili, start at the bottom right corner, go around counterclockwise. We'll pick up here tomorrow. We'll say Shkoyach. Thank you. Thank you.
and it's for grabs as opposed to anything.